Today is 28th. Is Nathaniel Barron's here? Nathaniel Barron's. Not online students. Oh, so he's late on today. Who's next? March 2nd, Sam Smith. Sam Smith in the classroom. Maybe I'll send him an email later. Anybody else see any antitrustee news? Anything interesting happening in the news?
Plenty. It's just all Ukraine. You know?
It's all Ukraine right now. I haven't posted a week 8 page yet. I'll get on that in a moment. Today we're going to continue to catch up on some stuff that we've been working on up until now. I'll share this briefly just for kicks. All right. Marty Rizzo is a professor at NYU. And where's the big party tomorrow night? Is there a big party tomorrow night? Shouldn't there be? It's Fat Tuesday, isn't it? The day before Lent. There's a carnival down in Mardi Gras in New Orleans. My friend Marty Rizzo said he's against Lent. I think there should be a season where people's goodness is celebrated, where the miracles of human progress against disease, whatever takes center stage, it's a matter of perspective. Think positive. And Vernon Smith says, I interpret Lent as protected from government under the right of assembly and free religion. You are free to express why you are against Lent. The proposal is similar to what has happened in redefinition of holidays like Columbus Day. Vernon Smith has a Nobel Prize in economics. I jumped in and say, some years back I gave up drinking for Lent. My best friend gave up drinking with me for Lent. Vernon Smith thought that was funny. I have a post that Adam Smith worked I'll pull up in a second, but I said I'll add this analysis for now. A fast is subversive to technocratic Keynesianism. By adopting increased frugality for a season, we not only demonstrate sympathy and solidarity with the least of these, but we also cause the real prices of essential goods to fall, benefiting those with low incomes most. Fasting from buying a yacht won't help those with low incomes, but fasting from meat will. Right? So a fast is, you consume less. Now, Keynesianism would say, if the economy is in a recession, everybody should buy more. That's not what Keynes would say. That's what Keynesianism would say. What happens when you turn something into an ism? Right? So I thought that was interesting. The article that I had at Adam Smith Works a while back is what would Adam Smith say about fasting? Become willing to share bread with the hungry and enter into solidarity with the suffering of others requires the activation of what Adam Smith calls sympathy. The ability to enter into another person's sentiments through imagining oneself in her place. Christians around the world entered into Lent, a season of fasting on February 26th. This was a couple of years ago. The month-long fast of Ramadan is a few weeks away for Muslims, and Jewish observance of Pesach, 8 days of fasting for leavening, begins in early April. Among the reasons for fasting are to consecrate oneself, to enter into solidarity with others, to become contrite and commemorate past sufferings and miracles, and to have more to share with others. Isaiah says, is this not the fast that I chose? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let oppressed go free, to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house when you see the naked to cover him, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? To become willing to share bread with the hungry and enter into solidarity with the suffering of others requires the activation of what Adam Smith calls sympathy. The ability to enter into another person's sentiments through imagining oneself in her place. Smith provides some wisdom about why sympathy for the suffering or grieving is usually difficult for us. But on the contrary, when we condole with our friends in their afflictions, how little do we feel in comparison of what they feel? We sit down by them, we look at them, while they relate to us the circumstances of their misfortune, we listen to them with gravity and attention. But while their narration is every moment interrupted by those natural bursts of passion, which often seem almost to choke them in the midst of it, they're crying. How far are the languid emotions of our hearts from keeping time to the transports of theirs? Are we really fully entering into sympathy with them? We may be sensible at the same time that their passion is natural, and no greater than what we ourselves might feel upon the like occasion. We might even inwardly reproach ourselves with our own want of sensibility. I should be grieving more with this person. And perhaps on that account work ourselves up into an artificial sympathy. That's interesting. Artificial sympathy. Which, however it is raised, is always the slightest and most transitory imaginable. Doesn't really change us, doesn't really enter into their sympathy. Generally, as soon as we have left the room, vanishes and is gone forever. Nature, it seems, when she is loaded with our own sorrows, thought that they were enough, and therefore did not command us to take any further share in those of others than what was necessary to prompt us to relieve them. This passage reminds me of Job's friends, supposedly consoling him, but unable to truly enter into his suffering. Even after 7 days sitting with him in silence, it's very difficult to enter into the suffering of others. Smith even suggests that the one who suffers will try to conceal or downplay the extent of his suffering to make it easier for others to sympathize with them. In order to produce this concord, as nature teaches the spectators to assume the circumstances of the persons principally concerned, so she teaches that this last in some measure to assume of those of the spectators. So the person who is actually grieving sympathizes with those who are trying to sympathize with the griever, and in so doing does not express as fully the grief as they would, apart from the spectators being there with them. As they are continually placing themselves in his situation and thence conceiving emotions similar to what he feels, so he is as constantly placing himself in theirs and thence conceiving some degree of that coolness about his own fortune, with which he is sensible that they will view it. As they are constantly considering what they themselves would feel if they actually were the sufferers, so he is as constantly led to imagine in what manner he would be affected if he was only one of the spectators of his own situation. As their sympathy makes them look at it in some measure with his eyes, so his sympathy makes him look at it in some measure with theirs, especially when in their presence and acting under their observation. And as the reflected passion, which he thus conceives, is much weaker than the original one, it necessarily abates the violence of what he felt before he came into their presence, before he began to recollect in what manner they would be affected by it, and to view his situation in this candid and impartial light. It's hard to read stuff that was written a long time ago. Adam Smith's language is somewhat meandering, somewhat complex, harder for us to read. It's good for you, it builds character. So we might expect that those with whom we desire to sympathize might not reveal to us the full extent of their situations. By fasting, by feeling some common pain, though it can only be a pain of the body, we bring ourselves closer to them and free them from having to perform so strenuously for our approbation. In this season of fasting, we can allow our impartial spectators to see more, to see better, and to enter more deeply into the suffering and sentiments of others. We can live the commitments of our religions, and we can also use Adam Smith to see things we otherwise would turn away from and try to avoid sympathizing with. We can learn to so sympathize that we are motivated towards meaningful action, solidarity, generosity, and a greater fellow feeling. Adam Smith, of course, was not religious. Some people say that he tried to say the invisible hand was God. He did not quite make that claim. His mother was very religious, and he lived with his mother until she died, which was when he was even very old. He even gave up getting married, perhaps, to stay and take care of his mother when she got sick. His father died when he was a little boy. entering into the solidarity of others. This whole idea of thinking about sympathetic exchange in terms similar to market exchange is peculiar, but I think it is one of the most interesting insights we can have from developing our understanding of economics. Vernon Smith, with his co-author Bart Smith, have an entire book called Humanomics. And in that book, Humanomics, Smith and Wilson take Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments, the book he wrote before he wrote An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, and then apply game theory to the theory of moral sentiments to try to develop propositions about the way people actually behave in the real world. Somebody left a comment. Wonder if it was on this post. Oh, wait, Siri. No, that's on something else. All right. Do. Let's stop sharing. New share. Stop share. Oh, I forgot to the last share. Okay. And so we take a couple of minutes then to develop a little bit further our understanding of game theory, in part to understand what's happening in competitive situations, like those we're talking about with among firms, but also to take those ideas and be able to apply them to social circumstances. So we could have a game between A and B, and player B can choose strategy A or strategy B. Player A can choose strategy A or strategy B, like this. We could have payoffs that look like this. Now, is there a dominant strategy for each player? And if so, where will they end up? Anybody got an answer? So player B is choosing between strategy A and strategy B, right? And his decisions are in the second place. So player B has to choose between 1 or 2, or -1 and 1. In both cases, player B chooses strategy A. Player A has to choose between 1 or 2, or -1 and 1. So player A always chooses strategy B. Right? So we wind up in this corner. Is that where everybody else wound up? Okay. So this is a dominant strategy. Where each player, right, has a dominant strategy. And as a result, there is a single solution. There could be a situation like this. Where would we wind up here?
Top left and bottom right.
You can't be in two places at once. So that's top left or bottom right, but not and. There are two strategies, right, that are what we're going to call a Nash equilibrium. Why are they Nash equilibrium? Because once you're there, you wouldn't move. Once you're there, you wouldn't move. So if we're already in AA, would player A have any incentive to switch to B independently? No. If we're in AA, would player B have an incentive to switch to B unilateral? No. And similarly, if we started out at BB, either player would have an incentive to move from that strategy. Are you with me? This is sometimes called the battle of the sexes. The idea is you and your significant other agree to meet at the movie theater. You're going to see a film. And once you get to the movie theater, there are two movies playing. A rom-com and an action movie. Right? To be super stereotypical. Right? Which movie do you go to? You arrive at the movie theater and your significant other isn't there yet, or they are already there and you don't know. They've already gone into the movie theater. Which one do you go into? You could choose to go to the action film, right, hoping that your significant other also went into the action film, or you could go into the rom-com, hoping that your significant other already went into the rom-com, but you can't know where they went. And once you're in, you can't switch, right? It's a battle of sexes. It's a coordination problem involved here, right? You should have coordinated better ahead of time. There could be a strategy that looks like this, a game that looks like this. This is B, this is A. A, B. Okay. 0, 0, 0, -1, 1, 0, -1, 3. Where should we play in this game?
-1, 3.
Oh. Yeah. No.
Well, if we start here, what's B going to want to do?
0.
B's going to stay there, isn't B? B doesn't want to go to the right. B has to choose between left and right. What about A? What would A want to do?
1.
A would want to play down. If we're here, what would B want to do?
3.
Want to play right. If we're here, what would A want to do?
0.
Play up. If we're here, what would B want to do? Play left. It's a cycle, isn't it? There's no solution. Wherever we are, somebody wants to move. Is there a way to deal with this? The answer is yes. You can play a mixed strategy. If A chooses A with a probability of 75% and chooses B with a strategy of probability of 25%, right? And if B chooses strategy A with a probability of 50% and strategy B with a probability of 50%, then they all end up being as best off as they possibly can. I leave that as an exercise for the students. Okay. Well, can this relate back to what we've been doing with oligopolistic situations? Imagine we have two firms and they're trying to decide what quantity to produce at, a low quantity or a high quantity. Right? If player B has to choose between playing low and high, and player A has the same decision. Uh-oh, lose ink here. We can go back to our algebra. We won't right now, but we could. we would find that the payoff, if they both play low, would be A squared divided by 8B. And remember, we're talking about, right? A over B. Right, and we want to know the profit and the payoff if they both choose to produce a low quantity, we put them something like this, they both have a decently high payoff that they divide. Okay. And the idea here is that they're producing 1/4 of the competitive quantity, but each of them gets 1/8 of the competitive quantity, right? And so then 1/8 of the competitive quantity multiplied by, I'm not quite sure how I get that A, but the idea is that this is the area of profit that each of them captures. If one firm plays low and the other plays high, right, the firm that plays low you get a payoff of 3A squared divided by 32B. The firm that plays high would get 9A squared divided by 64B, which is bigger. I think that this change multiplied by 3 is bigger than this change multiplied by 2. So the firm that plays high has a higher overall level payoff than the low playing firm does. And if you sum the two together, it's going to be less than the sum of these two. Similarly, this would be the payoff if this firm played high and this firm played low. And then if they both choose to play high, they are somewhat worse off than they would be in this case. Because you're dividing by 9 instead of by 8. Right, so you're somewhat worse off. But each firm, right, has some incentive to play high, so long as the other firm is playing low. We wind up here, it's a bit of a prisoner's dilemma. That's how we get the reaction curves that we actually get. Remember, the sum of these two, that would be 1/3 of the competitive output. Are you with me? More or less? Okay. So this is showing how game theory is related to the Cournot equilibrium that we have solved for in the past. Talk about today. We don't have enough time to do this. Yeah, well, let's try. I'll walk through the exam now a little bit. I'll just talk a little bit about the solutions here. Okay, and how I was thinking about these questions. And if I don't get to it sooner, I will grade the exams over break. I'll do my best to get to it sooner, but probability is low. Suppose a new production technology is developed that increases the firm level output in a particular market that is perfectly competitive by 10%. What might this market be? I was just asking you to take a commodity or some good or service that makes sense for this to work. Right. So it could have been shoes for all I care. It could have been green, something like that. What? okay? Now, the question is, how will this affect total market output and price? You should have drawn, right, a basic supply and demand curve, and just shown that as an increase in total productivity, that the supply curve would shift. And so total output would increase and price would fall. Well, then what happens to the individual entrepreneur's profits? Well, because the price level falls, depending upon where you draw your average total cost curve, you can draw it beneath all of this. Right? You can draw it beneath all of this. Depending upon where you show it, you can definitely show that profits decrease. If you had your average total cost curve here to begin with, then some firms are going to become unprofitable. They're going to drop out of the market, which would then shift the supply curve back. Right? If you had it here, then at the new level, at the new lower price level, then there would be the same number of firms. They would just be earning zero profits. But in any case, the individual entrepreneur's profits decrease. How could collusion among entrepreneurs change the results? Well, collusion amongst entrepreneurs would imply that instead of increasing the supply curve, they would hold the supply curve constant by monitoring one another's behavior and not increase, and nobody increases output. If nobody increases output, but everybody's cost curves remain as they were before or lower, right? Then each firm will be capturing more profits. What if the developer of the new technology only shares it with her closest associates? In that case, right, the supply curve doesn't shift at all. And there is no reason for it to shift. Only that one individual and their close associates, right? Those firms have discovered a new lower cost method of production, right? And so as a result, those few that know it capture larger profits. Give a brief answer to each of the following. Since a monopolist is the only supplier of a well-defined product, there's no limit to the price it may charge. That's not true because even a monopolist faces a downward sloping demand curve, which means that there is some price at which nobody is going to buy it. So the monopolist can't raise its price infinitely. Explain why a monopolist will never set a price and produce the corresponding output at which the demand is price inelastic. That's just saying, why won't the monopolist produce in the lower half of the demand curve, right? Even if the costs were zero, the marginal costs were zero, the monopolist would produce at the unit elastic quantity. Any cost above that, and the monopolist is going to charge a price above the unit price, unit elastic point, so they will always produce in the price elastic portion of the demand curve. Okay, marginal costs serve as a guide to how much of a good to produce, but average costs help indicate whether to produce the good at all. Explain. This here is asking you to remember the distinction between average variable costs and average total costs, right? And a price that, a market price that is low enough, right, helps you to know whether or not to shut down. A price that's higher would cause you to maybe to not shut down. Very high cost would cause you to shut down altogether. But marginal costs tell you how much to produce. These average costs tell you whether to stay in or not. Right? So the marginal cost is explaining the quantity. The average total cost doesn't tell us anything about quantity. The marginal cost we want to set to equal to marginal revenue. That generates our quantity decision. The average costs tell us whether to stay in or to bail from the market. Okay, list the assumptions of the perfect competition model. Here we have perfect information, homogeneous goods and services, free entry and exit, and large numbers of buyers and sellers. What's the most important conclusion of these assumptions? That in imperfect competition, the each individual firm is a price taker rather than a price chooser. And maybe you could have said that the firm under these circumstances only earns normal profits. Those are the two possible conclusions. I preferred this conclusion, but I'll take that. Maggie Rogers, tour manager, reported to her that all the tickets for a concert for the next 6 months had been sold out. Maggie fired the manager. Why? Because if the tickets are already sold out, and Maggie Rogers is a monopoly in being Maggie Rogers, right? Then by selling out, the tour manager priced at the perfectly competitive level of prices, whereas Maggie could have earned greater profits by withholding some tickets and charging a higher price and earned personal greater profits. Now, I have a buddy who bought tickets to a 311 concert several years ago. Stop. And he bought his tickets for the concert, and a couple weeks later, he bought tickets not just for himself, but also for his friends. And a couple weeks later, before the show came to town, they released a whole other set of tickets at a lower price. These are all general admission tickets. So sit wherever you can, right? I mean, it's a ska show anyway. You want to be on the floor skanking with everybody else. Okay. He was pissed. He was really angry. And I explained to him, actually, what's just happened here is that 311 is engaging in price discrimination. That what they're doing is they would only want to produce this many tickets at the high price, and they would only sell this many tickets overall. They would not sell the show out. But then if they wait and then release more tickets, then they can sell the whole show out. Now, if they sell out the show, they might actually be able to cover their costs. The cost of 311 coming down might be really high. Right? So if the cost of 311 coming to town is really high and they would not be able to cover those costs, the total costs, by only charging the high rate, or even by only charging the competitive rate, if they can only cover their costs by engaging in price discrimination, then you should be glad that they did engage in price discrimination, because the alternative is what? Yeah?
They can't have the concert. They
don't come to town. That's right. You don't get to see any 311. Right? So price discrimination can be a more efficient outcome, particularly if the provider is some sort of a monopolist. Who's getting more of the surpluses? The seller. Okay, but you're still getting surpluses. Which brings me back to that same idea of squabbling over surpluses. I have no sympathies. The next question asks you to draw some graphs, and this is confusing. I said you can draw two different demand curves, D1 and D2, such that a single monopoly would charge the same price but produce different quantities. And I said, assume the producer has a flat, horizontal, and positive marginal cost curve. So the first thing you should have done for this was to draw marginal costs. Flat, horizontal, non-zero marginal cost curve. A lot of you missed that. That's okay. I'm giving partial credit. Just makes it a pain in the ass to create. Okay. Then we want to show two monopolies, right? A single price monopoly two different situations where the price is the same, the quantities are different. And the way to do that, and I did this in class, but to remind you, the way to do that is to show two different demand curves that have the same intercept on the price line, but different elasticities. Well, they are different in elasticity. What's interesting is that the unit elastic point on each graph is at the same price. And the monopolistic price is going to be the same, but in order to show that, you have to draw the marginal revenue curves for both, and not everybody drew the marginal revenue curves. But if you did, you would find that the monopoly price in both circumstances would be the same, even though they had different intercepts on the quantity axis. Similarly, you could show the same quantity but different price. The way you do that is by having the same intercept on the quantity line, but different intercepts on the price line. Again, you got to draw your marginal revenue curves. Right, and the result is different prices. Right? So this is what I was looking for on that question. It was to see, are you thinking about it? And I know it was complicated. It was to see, are you thinking about it? I've drawn all over that, so now I won't be able to draw on this. Can't see through it. The idea behind this graph, right, was to take the total cost and total revenue curves and to build marginal cost and marginal revenue curves on here that would make sense. A couple things you should be looking for in doing this. First of all, you notice total revenues are a straight line. So then what would the marginal revenue curve be? Straight line this way. Right, because the first derivative of a straight line is whatever the slope of that line is. Very straight across. Second, you should notice that the total cost curve does not intersect at the origin, but slightly above it, so there is a fixed cost. There are some fixed costs involved here. So then, if there are some fixed costs, then average total costs and average variable costs will be different from one another. There will be some difference. The next thing you should notice is that this firm can earn profits. Because when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, there is a gap between revenue and costs. So this firm is earning profits. So then, when we draw our marginal cost curve, which should relate to the slope of the total cost curve everywhere along it, starts out high. Where does marginal cost hit bottom? Its lowest level, at the inflection point of the total cost curve. So this should align with the bottom of our marginal cost curve. Where should marginal cost equal marginal revenue? Here at the profit maximizing point. So there should be guides between this graph and this graph showing you where the bottom of the marginal revenue curve is and the profit maximizing quantity are, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, because the slopes of these two lines are the same at that point. Okay. And we know that there's profits here. We have to ask ourselves, where does average total cost equal marginal revenue? And that would be taking a line from the origin to the total cost curve, and it would intersect somewhere near here. So in this region is where average total costs would hit bottom. And average variable costs would hit bottom somewhere sooner because they're coming from this point to the total cost curve. And if we wanted to include average fixed costs, they would look like this. getting lower and lower and lower. Average total cost and average variable cost should be getting closer and closer to one another as average fixed costs are getting lower and lower. Why ask you to draw this? Because understanding all of these intuitions is important. Right? It's important. And being able to recognize, oh, I'm drawing straight lines from this origin and this origin to figure out what the average costs are. The marginal revenue cost is going to be where this slope is equal to this slope. And that's going to actually be the profit maximizing point, and this firm is going to earn profits. It all can be translated from these two lines to these many lines. They are interrelated. Suppose, gosh, looks like I set a greasy donut down on this. Suppose the Bluetooth headphone manufacturers decide what size factory to build. Show a long run average total cost curve and identifying the increasing, constant, and decreasing returns to scale ranges along it. Also construct short run average total cost and marginal cost curves for small, medium, and large plants. The first step is to do long run average total costs. Then you can show 3 different size plants. Short run average total cost 1, short run average total cost 2, short run average total cost 3. And then you're going to want to draw marginal cost curves through the bottoms of each of these. Marginal cost 1, marginal cost 2, marginal cost 3. And you'll say that, right, over this range, you have increasing returns to scale. Over this range, you have roughly constant returns to scale. And over this range, you have decreasing returns to scale. As the plant gets bigger at some point, the average cost per unit goes up. All right, finally, you have the schedule. And you should be able to identify. The first thing that you're going to know about this schedule is that you're going to want to build your total revenue curve. And you're also going to find your marginal revenue. Although your marginal revenue should be equal to price. And then from there, right, you have to produce a whole number of items. How many should they produce and at what price? And how do you know you should be able to build these extra columns in order to find where marginal revenue equals marginal cost? Right, and then from that, read off the quantity. And we don't have time to walk through that, but I think you understand. Okay, so next time we'll start getting into, I think, chapter 7 of the textbook. And what I hope to be doing for this course is to start discussing some cases where we actually start to apply some of this theory to real world situations where antitrust law has become important. So I will see you all then.